Okay, we're going to do a little connectivity thing and talk about Doggerland, um, Atlantis, ancient archaic beliefs, Proto-Indo-Europeans, mass migrations, Cro-Magnon man, and a lot of things. And I'm going to put some things together that hopefully you've been already putting together with other videos that I've shown. But sometimes I realize there's just not that connection, and I haven't. Sometimes I do videos that are very much in depth in a moment, sometimes they're in a broad sense, and sometimes connections aren't made. And this is one that's an important one, and so I thought I would bring it up in this matter. This is from a Robert Sepper video where he's also talking about Doggerland and the North Sea and just some possible beliefs on it. And this is a man that's a lecturer, and the picture that you see over here on the right, and hopefully it shows up pretty good. It seems very bright. Let me see if I can get that to dim at all. Just enough to maybe see it. Where you see the real light area is tundra, and where you see the darker area during the last loss of all ice on Earth, pretty much, that's the height of the sea that would have been there. And it encompasses a few other areas, and it inundates areas and makes it different. And the boot turns into a skinny little thing because the water's enveloped it. And many of the islands out here in the Aegean and just Mediterranean are actually submerged because they're only 100 feet above water, and it went up 104 feet, and they're 4 foot below water. Just, blah, 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 blah. You get the idea. Well, the discussion that he's having, though, is a few different things at one time on this map, and he's been showing different things. And I've seen this separate presentation from the portion that Robert shows, but I'm not going to show either. Don't want to kife on it that way, but I would like to discuss it. The spots that he's showing here are spots that they have early cave art and have found Cro-Magnon himself and people of that age and artifacts, generally caves and everything. And what's noted in this map and not discussed in his discussion is that the areas that aren't the tundra areas don't have that. And so looking into the timeline that is, if these people are that smart to only put them in high places because of a coming ice age, there must be others that are not. But how many of them are in the blue area? And the answer is none. Oddly, the answer is none. There is, all of them are in the white area. You can look at this thing up close and watch the video. I'll try to get a link to it and put it in the thing, but you know me, I fail to do that often because I've lost it and everything, and I don't have it in my top deal, so I'll have to re-look it up again. Regardless of that fact, what we're looking at is adding additions up of cave art, actual found Cro-Magnons, and early primitive men matching out on this map, okay? And so whenever it goes down, now that's up, we were talking about, whenever it goes down from where it is now, okay, so we're only talking in a now situation where we get it now, it goes over 300 feet lower than it was or is now to us in the last ice age. So some 10,500 years ago, and right into that range, it was 300 foot below. Well, this area here that he's showing of Britain would be all solid and not have water in between the areas. It is a solid area between France and London and so on. There's a solid area that would have been there, i.e. it's not over 300 foot deep, okay, in the North Sea in this area, and people dredge for fish and stuff, and have probably run into it and been ruining any little structurelets or anything that could have been there dragging nets. And they do know that there are places that peak up somewhat, right? But during the catastrophe of the last ice age, this place became inundated. And we've talked before about the Black Sea and how it used to be fresh water, and then the Mediterranean, by the flow up of this ice flow right here, broke into it and turned it into salt water, right? And we did the Bob Ballard one, where right over here, in the Aegean, there's a circle. In fact, I think that looks like a circle, and it's there. It's right in the middle of where it is now. And I know that's tiny in your thing, especially if you're on a phone. Gosh, but yeah, that they found a crop circle that's there that actually had to be about 9,000 year old, because that area wasn't under water about 9,000 years ago, and that's it, or 9,000 BC, and that's about it. So this is correlating all these times, and of course the ocean is one big sea. And I want to do one philosophical type of looking at it here, but they talk about the Indian Ocean and this ocean and that ocean, and really there's no ocean. The Mediterranean is actually just an extension off of actually the Atlantic, and all the oceans hooked together, although most people agree with 5 oceans, and we talk about the Antarctic Sea too versus the Arctic, so we get 5 out of the idea. Different oceans of the world, and then we have seas, and of course some of these seas aren't even really seas, they're just big lakes and so on, like the Sea of Galilee, and that was just used to make a biblical thing because it always has a repetition of doing things over and over, and typology, and therefore they have to have the sea involved in it and everything. But when you look at the story, these people weren't really the seagoing people. Some of the people in the story really were, and some of the people that brought the story that ended up being the story really were. But that's another story. So let's get back to this right here. So this area, Doggerland, it's looking like it would have been free and clear of land. And let's see if I can get another good picture for you of what he's showing you here. And here he shows that they're dredging an area out, and literally in between this and that next island over there, there's a small area in between the middle of this where it gets to about 60 or 70 foot deep. Other than that, it's much more shallow than that, all the way going out, kind of deal. And so if the ocean would just go down about 20 feet, that would no longer be an island right there. It's just one simple example, but if it went down about 60 foot, there would be about 12 islands that would start connecting with just a couple near it, and a big old island out there, but it wouldn't be very deep in between it now either. And if we go down farther and so on. And so they're dredging around in here, and in dredging these areas to build, they keep finding things, and they found these arrowhead type spears, and there's a marking notch on them, right? Looks like a shogo bone or something like that that's been found all the way here and up into Africa and things like that. And this has teeth running all the way through it, but it's also been made into more of a spear set and can be handled from this end. And there are 3 of them that are found in this one part, but they found a lot more of them now, and they did this by dredging, and it's out in the water. But I wanted to show you this example here where people are dredging up, and they're finding again also here in this one dredge right here, there's a person in there, they have found some stuff, and he's digging around in it, and he's talking about it. And there's already found here something made of posts. Can you already see that in there? Something made of posts. Now, I don't know if they put posts in there to try to put a blockade, but I see posts. He doesn't make a mention of that, though. He's got his own agenda when he's talking about things in certain pictures, and a lot of people do. And so do I. So that's the reason I'm not even talking about what they're talking about necessarily. And he goes on with the conversation of this Doggerland, and where easily it would have been 300 foot and everything through here, but then there would have been a river that ran through it, and a central area that was slightly raised that right now people talk about you don't drag fishing nets near, right? But that would have made this connect. In fact, all through here doesn't exist, and this just becomes a little mountain, what would be the island, and it's connecting to the mainland. And so here's a whole area that could even connect to here, by the way. They talk about there being an area that fell in here, and they want to say it had happened, well, 40,000 years ago or so, and that was the part of the thing that made the cliffs of Dover and how high they are. And you look at the differential of that to the groundwater and area right around it, and that's huge difference. And other people have said, oh, that was just one little movement, though. It dropped 10, 12, 15 foot, and that 40 million years ago was whenever it pushed up into there and then broke loose and did its deal. And well, that's different. And then very much akin to where Gibraltar is and what it did. But that's, and from a different purpose, though, too, also from, tectonic plates and everything. Anyhow, so this idea can be looked at as a northeastern or Britain Atlantis, right? And if you come out the Pillars of Hercules, if we still had the map up from earlier, you come out the Pillars of Hercules and you turn right and you go up and you go Spain, France, and right into Britain right there. And there are tales, of course, of the Egyptians and everything else too. But I've shown videos recently of them finding a Danish burial from way back when in one of those highlands caves that is marked as a little blue dot. And there are faience beads from Egypt. In fact, they say they're made just like them, and then when they compared them to like King Tut's era, whenever they're using them, they're like, it's exactly the same beads, and they date the burial around the same time. And so it shows you there were connections that a lot of people aren't mentioning. Well, let me make you another connection. So the story of Atlantis, and we talk about losing the land in a day and a night or real quick and everything, and it seems like a lot of people had this story. And I've told you the Sumerians have a story that talks about an elder time, and then they have one that happens during them being in there. This is one thing, and some people started believing their gods lied because he said he would never flood the world again. Well, this was a Sumerian story before the Bible. So you think there's only one flood, but there have been a few, and even in Sumeria. But they're localized floods, understand me, but great floods, because people are living around river valleys and so close into it, and everything gets washed away if there's a huge flood or something happens, right? Well, these same similar people that floated around and brought humanity to each other, which started out in Britain and into Russia, and went into Proto-Indo-European lands in the steppes, and out all the way towards China, and grow and regressed, and then when waves came back into this area, all had this story too. And they were, of course, there was a Silk Road long before we talk about there legally being a Silk Road. And we can see that through simple things like cannabis and a lot of things that have been taken from here to here to there, and how things start to show up places. But then there's folklore, and it's one thing that I really like to study, because there's stories about the Doggerland stories, and it kind of goes along with what you would think people in that area would say versus what was said about that area, if it was to be true. And it's kind of odd. But then there's other stories, of course there's fairy tales and all that stuff, and the stories of Middle Earth that we talk about. But of course Mediterranean means Middle Earth, and there was a reason that this was used in that connotation. I'll have to do a better one on Tolkien and all of Middle Earth and some of its symbology, rather than just occasionally bring it into the conversation. Regardless, so we have the Greeks that are told that they don't remember but the last flood, but there have been many, right? He gets told this by the priest, and this is Solon, this is his grandfather, so this would have happened many years before himself. And then he says it happened 9,000 years ago. People have put that together with dating, and they go, well, that's about 10,500 BC, and it's around that time. But the Egyptians have this story. So what are the Egyptians in this moment telling you? Or what information could you glean from it, other than the story that's told? Which people realize that you can't add up everything. Well, a moment ago it talks about it flooded away and moles, shoals of mud and all that stuff, and this is what that place would have been like if the story would have been kept from the ideal of when it was after it had happened, and not even up to the sea level we are today. For we know that the sea level's been rising and rising and rising slowly, but it's not doing any Al Gore stupid crap. And hey, I could do another video on that, on projected amounts and so on. I remember we were going to die in 12 years, and it's been 20 now. So, and what's happened? It's raised almost an inch. But man, if it all melts away, rapidly we're going to have a problem, and it's going to, But we're being told about it and notified about it, and it's not like it's going to happen in a day and a night, unless you're in a place like this, which when it was about 300 foot below, which is what they're talking about around the Younger Dryas event, that it would have been just above sea level, and there was a river running through it and everything, right? Now I'm going to digress and get back into this. Let's see if I can show his picture that he shows. And they have Dogger Bank today that they know about, but that would have been above, so. But they can see whenever they use the radar that they use for finding oil rigs and everything, that there are rivers that run through part of it. And so in ancient times, and the rivers that run out off of England that was still there run after on the ground. And they do that in America in a lot of places too. And so you can tell, oh, it was lower whenever the rivers were coming out. Now it's a lot higher, and it isn't scoring through the land anymore, but it used to be way out there. Well, that used to be the edge of land not so long ago, and people live around the coast. And so we're not looking in the right places, and all of a sudden you ended up with aquatic archaeology and things. And of course, through all the fish studies that I talked about, I was well in the ocean and different things about it, and wanted to find out. And then, of course, when he starts bringing up the global warming and all those type of things, I started looking at gradient numbers, and I'm like, hey, he's not, no, he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. He's trying to fearmonger. Oh, wow. And then the more you hear about it, the more you realize it's all about fear mongering on something. Oh my God, the turtle's going to attack you. But let's just continue on. The idea that I was trying to present, what can we get out of Solon? And this is a good video. Whenever he talks to this guy here, they show a lot of neat information. But what they can tell you from this ground radar type stuff that they've used, that there's a sinuous fluvial feature that runs around through here. It's like a line that's cut through, but there are some areas that look squared off that you can semi-see or whatever in here, and it could be slightly worked. There's a huge domed area. They call it a salt dome forming region, and there's a fault zone that runs through it. And so that correlates with the rivers too that leading into it. So whenever this area was all above land, it would have had a little river that runs through it. It had zigzags and everything, and here's where the coastline would have been at a certain time, because they can find a shoreline that's running around it. So it changed large over time. So again, what can you find whenever you look at something like this? And again, here's the rivers and so on that come through it at different times and where they met. Well, if you're hearing the story from an Egyptian, he knows them or is somewhat involved, isn't he? He knows this story that he passed along. He's the one that brought about the whole story of Atlantis. And you can say it was a tale made up by Phoenicians and stuff. And yeah, it definitely could be. But the Phoenicians were said to come up out of the Red Sea and across land and into the Mediterranean. Yeah. And that they used to be like Sumerians and Saudi Arabians before the people that are there now. This is not too many thousand years ago too, but that's a different story. But that hooks up, and why do those boats look so much like Viking boats and all those things, and all of these people kind of had the same look? Well, there's exposure. By the time the Vikings came down, they had had a massive amount of exposure to these Phoenicians. In fact, in a sense, they're one and the same, and then not, of course, because whenever you expose yourself to a group of people that are slightly different than yourself, it doesn't make them you, but over time they take on a lot of things, right? And the Celtic and all those druidic stories and things that we talk about is the differential between the endemic people that were up there at the time that had stayed, as some of them had meant east, and then coming into the last ice age and the bad things happening, a wave coming back in because of catastrophe. And it seems like over Siberia had a huge problem, but then Black Sea had a huge problem. They had a huge problem, and so Doggerland disappeared. And what seems a day and a night, the land they lived in around the Black Sea disappeared, and what seems a day is night. The sea took it all away because it's salt water now instead of fresh. So you can imagine that they had the story, the Sumerian story, this story, that story. No wonder they all have a story about Atlantis. And that Atlantis is not one place, that whenever they're talking about it in the Greeks, they seem to have figured out that it's in North Africa over there near the eye of the Sahara. But because they call it Atlas Mountains and Atlantis even on Herodotus' map there, but yet at the same time in the description it would actually only be North America, which could be a strange reckoning on the idea of what people were capable of going and doing at the time that this great catastrophe happened, and that there was a great people, but you're going to blame it on the gods, because you did every time, and volcanoes and things of the Greeks that come up with all this stuff that really blends into what we have now. And I've showed you that there's a main Sumerian connection to the Bible and the people of the Bible. And the 12 tribes all are the Caucasians that came up out of the area. In fact, the story talks about the boat that lands in the Caucasus Mountains and everything, and those people come out, and somehow in a modern day we want to try to make it be 3 different races come out of 2 different Caucasian people, and then one of them gets cursed, and then you get a Negro too. And it doesn't talk about that in any way, shape, or form. And then people can shred the Bible, and you've seen me be able to do it sometimes, but also I can show you what it connects to. And was that real? I'm telling you, all these things are real to these people. And I'm telling you, this flood was real too, and it was real to these people that were up here, and it was real to people around the Black Sea and around down Sumeria, and it really happened to people in the Indus Valley situation. And then that river dried up totally too. It's amazing, but the one that had happened to them seems to be one of the ones that's dried up, and they moved. But that's another story. And this has happened to many people and many cultures, and many people have many floods. But hey, those Amerindians that everybody talks about having a flood, well, they were over here right before the last ice age. There was some Proto-Indo-European influx we found now, but by the time they come over, they had already experienced it. In fact, they were maybe running from it. And in fact, instead of running back west whenever Siberia got hit bad or coming down, maybe they went across, because they had the same story of the flood. And did the story of the flood come from they were already here and they saw it happen in North America, or after and they know about it over there and the cause and effect of it all? People have seen a lot of plants, and they're going to look for plants now and things in here and do dredging and core samples and so on. But the Younger Dryas event was pinpointed because of a flower. There's a Dryas flower. It's a little pretty little white flower, and it grows up in the edge of the cold, but it won't grow in the ice and the cold, and it won't grow really down in the valleys. So it edges on things, and by where we can find that they used to be, we can see this event. This is the Younger Dryas event because it shows up that, hey, there's showtime, then wham, it goes back again. This radical thing that's never showed up in archaeology before, and we've been able to pinpoint it to different, what appears to be a splintered meteor hitting across all of the North American continent into Siberia and just into deep ice shelves and even part of North America. And the only part that we really see it cratering and things for is some of North America. The rest of it would have been directly into an ice shelf. This is the reason we lost all the great flora and fauna and the great mammoths and things like that. We've talked about that in a few different videos, like where did camels come from and how they used to be in Americas and a lot of other things that people just don't talk about and don't learn. But one thing that's beautiful here is whenever you can put something together where some people that are geologists that figured it out back in this time, and then this other guy has got things that are on Cro-Magnon. And funny how whenever you overlay those, it seems to be the higher ground where all those burials are. So that tells you that they only did it during that time, and you can even date it better because of that. And you can also see, what had gone before and after. There should be more. Did the ocean wash it away? Just being submerged and everything, did that make it go away? And if that does so well make it go away, then what are we going to find in Doggerland, if anything at all? And but if they're doing stonework and things like that, we'll find some stuff like the thing that they say that's off of Dominican Republic there, and they show those pictures, and one thing looks kind of like a step pyramid and squared off roads and everything. And I've showed you some time of me doing it, just going down on Google Earth in places that underwater have these weird grid things. It's kind of like the Bimini thing or the Bimini Road, but much more complex even in a few places, and nobody's even talking about it. Maybe somebody someday will start looking at things like this, but to some people like us, it really seems to be important, and maybe we would do it. But to all the other people that want to keep a current narrative going on, things like this are rocking the boat, and they don't like that. And I say the search for truth is truth. If it was the truth when it happened, then what we've lost is what we've lost. You have to know, the truth about things and quit trying to have a false narrative on it all. But, hey, that's just me. Anyhow, guys, so this idea that the ocean is rising and everything, and if it went through a radical phase of melting, these posts would become underwater, but the sea houses behind us wouldn't be, and it really isn't going to be that big of a deal. And hopefully y'all know that I've talked a bunch of times about Stonehenge and DNA arrivals and everything, and it appears to be this green-eyed gene along with the other blue-eyed gene are things that come into and men with, and this guy's even got reddish blonde hair, about the time of 6,000 years ago, and that this coupling of people in this Neolithic period that went through goes all the way to the time of Stonehenge, and then gets right then taken over. So that's the reason whenever the Romans come in and history and folklore get clinched, it's because about that time that was before them, and the one before is a mythological state, almost like the Titans, and then it's almost has that feel to it and a flavor. And I've talked about that in my other video about it. But migrations and changes, and that's why we also see a migration and change that goes into Egypt and starts to unify it. And it happened way after this, though. It's not 6,000 BC it starts at. No, I'm telling you, at 6,000 BC, the endemics got overrun by one group of people, and then later got ran over by another group of people that, coming together, grouped those two people and made it unified as Egypt itself. But that happened to quite a few other places. And then things started changing, and the ancient Sumerians were lost. But no, not really, where they just migrated to. Like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. But hopefully I got to the point. and did it well enough to you understand what I'm trying to refer to. Peace.